Hi, everybody. Welcome to our session tonight. I'm Rebecca Troop. I'm the Vice President of Community Relations at Seacoast Mental Health Center. For anybody that might not know, Seacoast Mental Health Center is one of the 10 community mental health centers in the state of New Hampshire. We have physical locations in Portsmouth and Exeter, New Hampshire. We see our clients in person in our offices as well as via telehealth, and we have an emergency services line that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also see emergency patients in Exeter Hospital, and we have coming in 2022 a new rapid response mobile crisis emergency services line as well. We are co-located in the majority of the schools in our catchment region. We have presence in some of the local primary care offices, and we work within some of the facilities where we have partnerships with groups such as Crossroads House or the Chase Home. As a community mental health center, we provide a broad, comprehensive array of high quality, effective, and accessible mental health services to children, adolescents, families, and older adults who reside in the eastern half of Rockingham County, regardless of their ability to pay. I am so incredibly thrilled tonight to introduce our guests, Mitch Wasden and Rachel Siddoway, and our Seacoast Mental Health Center moderator, Patty Driscoll. Some of you joined our session last fall when we spoke to Rachel and her mom, Rachel Wasden, regarding their first book, An Impossible Life. Now we'll talk to Rachel's dad about their newest book, An Impossible Wife, that talks about Rachel's mom, Sonja, and their journey and Mitch's journey from a caregiver perspective. So first, a couple brief pieces of business. You'll see on the bottom, there is a Q&A section. You can click on that and send any questions that you want to have asked to the participants towards the end of the event. And we will get to as many questions as we can. Part of the beauty of the conversation is really what comes from you, our audience, and what kind of wisdom and experience that Rachel and Mitch can share with you. So some more background. Mitch Wasden has spent about 30 years loving and living and at times caring for his wife, Sonja, who we talked to last fall. Sonja has lived with bipolar, anxiety, OCD disorders throughout her life and throughout their loving marriage. She talked last fall about her struggles with mental illness and their family's history with her suicide, mental health crises, all of their work, and particularly Sonja's work to shatter stigma around mental illness, and how she has created a life worth living throughout this journey. And now we're going to hear the story through the eyes of Mitch, how he shares how mental illness affects the entire family and his experience living amongst it. And Rachel is back, who has shared in both of these books in an incredibly powerful and eloquent way, her mother's journey and now her father's journey, and about their family's story with mental illness. And she speaks about how the entire family is impacted and how sometimes families feel hopeless and helpless, and yet there is hope in all of her message and in the family's tale. So this newest book is called An Impossible Wife, and it offers you, the reader, a look into the ways that Sonja's struggles impacted her marriage and her home life, but how they impacted Mitch personally, and it's really his journey through this. It highlights the way that mental illness, like so many chronic illnesses, doesn't just affect one person, it impacts the entire household. And this family has done amazingly brave and vital work to share their experiences nationally as they're traveling across the country and talking to all sorts of media, talking in schools, in libraries, in prisons and in jails, and really bringing this message of hope to people. And so now we hope that some of this brings a message to you as well. And finally, not to forget, our moderator, Patty Driscoll. Patty Driscoll is our Vice President of Clinical Operations for Adult Services, and she has been here at Seacoast Mental Health Center since mid-2012. And she's devoted her career to in the field of mental health for about 30 plus years. For the past 15 years, she's held management roles here, but is still very, very close in contact with direct client work. Patty's decades of experience have served both youth and adult clients, and she has a bachelor's of science and a master's of psychology and social work from the Hobart and William Smith colleges and the University of Buffalo in New York. So that is absolutely definitely enough from me. I'm going to turn this over to Patty. I'm going to go in the background and I'll be back to join all of you once they've had their discussion and we get to some Q&A.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. All right, so hi, Mitch and Rachel. Great to see you. And of course, you know, thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you and your whole family do to reduce stigma of mental illness. And of course, welcome back to Rachel. Some of you may have met Rachel last year during this event when we talked with Rachel and her mom, Sonja, about their book, An Impossible Life. And so you're back now, and with your second book, from the perspective of your dad. So we're thrilled that we're back together with you and that we're going to talk about this book. So from the perspective of your dad, who we're going to say is, in this context, right, a husband, father, and a caregiver, and a loved one of someone with a serious mental illness. So I finished the book over the weekend. And just like the first one, I am so impressed. I feel even more so than I did the first time, sort of because of getting to know you, Rachel, and getting to know your mom, and now getting to know your dad. It's like we're on the journey, like we're part of it, like you're in this sort of journey, the way it's written and the way Mitch shared his story, you feel like you're part of it. And sometimes that was challenging, sort of the roller coaster. Sometimes it was happy. Sometimes it was sad. Sometimes it was frustrating. Like many times, more in this book than I think in the last one. I'm not sure why, but I was like more frustrated at your mom. I don't know what, just at the, not your mom, but at the, at the illness that, and what it created, but such a roller coaster of emotions, but love and hope, being the most powerful emotions experience from it. So Rachel, in your author's note, which is always so profound, you put right out there that your dad, is a very private man, very private person. So this was hard. This was hard for your dad, and probably very hard for you to write this book and to pull out some of these extremely intimate experiences and thoughts and feelings from your dad. So it's a definitely a work of courage from both of you. You also note that this isn't about the kids. So it made me think of, and some of the audience might know this, but there's this show on TV, Everybody Loves Raymond. Oh, and at the beginning of the original series, they would say, this isn't about the kids. So, it's really more about the adults. So it made me think of that, and I chuckled. But you're right, it's not about the kids. That's your next book coming up, and we'll talk about that later. But it's about your mom and dad. And I quote from your author's note, "An impossible wife is my father's truth." And so that's just a great way to set the table for this. So thank you for that. All right, here we go. Let's get into it. So both of you, and however you want to do it and whatever's comfortable for you, if you don't mind, just sort of setting the stage for us. Not everybody in tonight's audience participated last year, so they're not really familiar completely with your family and your family story. So if one of you could maybe do a brief overview of the context here, that would be great.
Yeah, so last time we talked about that my mom has bipolar disorder, And we as a family hid her diagnosis for years. We didn't tell anyone,
Mhm.
friends, even family members, we didn't really share details with. So from the outside, it just looked like we were a normal family. My dad is the CEO of hospitals. We must be doing well. My parents have a great marriage. But behind closed doors, my parents were fighting every day. My mom was severely unstable with her undiagnosed illness, which later we found out was bipolar disorder. And so as she hid her illness, she kind of hit a breaking point. She attempted suicide. And whenever she did that, a leading psychiatrist at my dad's hospital said, don't bring her here. You should take her to a hospital where people don't know you. You know, this is kind of in a way, it was like he was trying to protect us, but protect us from what? And it's stigma. It's that this is embarrassing. This isn't something you want to be associated with. And to my mom's credit, that really lit a fire in her. And she was like, this is an illness just like any other illness. If I had cancer or a heart attack, you shouldn't tell me to go somewhere else. So she decided to share her life story completely unedited. And she asked me to interview her and write her life as honest and open as possible. And so An Impossible Life is the story of kind of her harrowing journey through bipolar disorder.
Right. Great. Thank you. Mitch, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sonja had always said that she wanted to tell her story and it was going to be her story. And she wasn't going to try and balance the perspective of her kids or me or and try and complicate it. And what she was trying to do is show people who didn't have a mental illness, this is what it feels like, but then show people that did have a mental illness, you know, hey, there's hope. And I was kind of in the same place that you were. And so she would talk about, hey, I want to do a book where you give your perspective. And I was like, yeah, sure. You know, yeah, one day, yeah, it'll be the last book or whatever. But she really felt like, no, you know, there's people that are supporting people with a mental illness. That they need to hear that other side as well, because a lot of times people don't realize that the person with the mental illness isn't the only person who's sick. The whole family is sick. And a lot of times we focus the treatment around the person who's mentally ill, and we're not really seeing maybe some of the gaps that the people who are supporting are having. And one of the things, you know, we talked about in the book is this very real thing of compassion fatigue, where, you know, the person, you know, Sonja would be so underwater. I'm her primary support to help, but then you're also the closest to the explosions. And so you get fragged a little bit, you know, you get friendly fire sometimes. And so it can be really difficult because you feel like you're giving and giving and giving, but then getting criticized for not giving enough. You know, and so at least in our situation, if I wasn't giving enough, or if she wasn't feeling filled up, you know, it could result in calls to her family that, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And can you believe Mitch did this and whatever? And that just erodes things even more. And so it becomes very hard in those moments to tease out and say, okay, who is the person and who is the illness? Because all I know is, you know, I'm not getting my needs met either. And so now we're both going down together. And so that can be, I think, you know, for years and years, that was a real difficulty that we had. Kind of as Rachel mentioned, you know, you wake up and there's the morning fight, and then you call in the afternoon, there's the afternoon fight, you come home and there's the nighttime fight. Like there's just a fight every single time. And you can't seem to get out of that loop. And in our situation, what was hard is because some of Sonja's family members had been diagnosed as bipolar and whatnot. She was terrified of the diagnosis, did not want to believe that it was her, was afraid of the stigma and what it would mean for her life. And so for years and years, we got kind of stuck in this, well, it's just a bad marriage. You know, it's just, you're not a very good husband. You don't make enough money. You're not kind enough. You're not, you know, all these different things. Or I hate this state. If we just didn't live in this state, I would be happy if I lived, you know, some other place. So we kind of got really stuck. And it really wasn't until we had a psychiatrist who had the courage to take Sonja on and just say, you are bipolar. And, she was kind of screaming back that she wasn't, and finally, realized she was. And that was the first moment that it's like, okay, maybe we're going to get somewhere, with this. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. So maybe just a little information on how you guys, how you wrote the book. What was the format?
Yeah, so it was very similar to the first one in the sense of interviewing. So, you have like a list of questions. I had a list of questions that I thought people wanted to know. And it was kind of great because after my mom's book, a lot of people did say, okay, I got to know about the marriage. I got to know, X, Y, and Z about Mitch. And so I was like, hey, so we already have kind of some questions people want to know. Yep. So I interviewed him, and then he went through the book, made sure it was, how he'd want his story to be told. And then my mom also looked through it, of course, because a lot of it's about her. And we wanted to make sure she was okay with what was being said.
Right.
But yeah, okay. It was a team effort.
Yeah.
Right.
I think too, in a 30-year marriage, you realize the book is going to contain about 1% of it.
Right.
So, it's hard to represent everything. And so really, we tried to share things that we thought would be useful to people going through the same issues. And so with Sonja's first book, she, gets a lot of people who reach out to her and say, oh my gosh, here's what I'm going through. And, she's talking with them about it. But then there's also people who love them and are supporting them who reach out to me and say, okay, this is how are you, how did you do this? And here's what I'm living with. So we wanted it to be useful, to people that may be supporting those who are, in support situations.
Great. And we will talk a little bit more about that. Some of the areas that we do want to focus on are about, caregivers. I mean, and we talked about this so that the audience is aware. I asked Mitch if that's okay, and he uses the term caregiver. He's a husband and a loved one, and sometimes a caregiver. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and hopefully some folks will maybe be able to relate to some of the things that you say and maybe learn. Get some advice from you about how to navigate all of that. I do want to ask you guys also, what are the takeaways you hope that the audience has from tonight's discussion?
I think my biggest takeaway is that the illness or any mental illness is not a personality flaw. It's not that this person is just flawed in some way that, they could change or help if they just wanted to. And when you view it as an illness outside of their personality, it's a lot easier to show compassion and love because you realize that person's in that body with the illness and they're battling it too, and it's really hard. But it can be unlike a wheelchair or diabetes. It can be hard sometimes to do that because a lot of the symptoms of mental illness are, conversational. It's that they're, they fight or they're depressed or they're anxious. And so it can be harder to not see all their words as just, oh, they're having all these personal attacks on me. And that really makes me think that they're a mean person, when aside, it's just they're in pain and they're lashing out because they're in pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I think as well, we spent a lot of time, where it was like, well, she just needs to take her medicine and she just needs to see her psychiatrist and she just needs to learn skills and whatever. And I think what I've, kind of learned over the years is actually, if you're in a supporting role as a family member, actually you need to learn skills too. And so, as Rachel said, separating out Sonja from her illness was important, but there's ways that we talk about her illness, which are just different. So, we talk about her just having big emotions. So it's like, okay, if I say something, her reaction is going to be this, whereas somebody else's may be that, but we just kind of roll with it, that's just how her emotions are. They're just bigger. And, and that's just, it doesn't have to be seen as like, oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated that you get angry so quickly or that you get escalated so quickly. Cause it's like, you know what, it is what it is. Your emotions are big. The other thing too is, just some bit of empathy for people with mental illness. So many times and Sonia has said this to you all, she gets it, that it's, if you're a care provider or a physician or a therapist, that sometimes someone with a mental illness might be a difficult patient, and that's maybe sometimes you feel like there's, is this person ever going to be able to see much improvement in their quality of life? One of the things that I think some of the therapists we've been so grateful for are the ones that have had a lot of empathy, and really see, her as a person. And I think it's helped me see Sonia as somebody who, when she's getting angry, usually that she's afraid, that it's a very lonely illness, that not a lot of people can understand what it feels to feel that way. And to see her a little bit more as a person who's just scared and she needs someone, she needs help, even though on the outside it looks like anger and it looks like she's yelling at me. That
Right.
really a lot of it is that she's afraid, and she doesn't know how to handle these really big emotions in her. And so that's, so I think I think knowing that, but then also knowing that there's hope. I always tell Sonia, I wish she and I would have read her book 30 years ago. Oh my gosh, how different our life could have been if 30 years ago we just knew what we know today. And so we're just hopeful other people that are feeling pretty hopeless can realize, actually it can be so much better, and you can have a life worth living if you seek help. Yeah.
Those are great. Thank you so much. And the point about empathy, I think, is huge. I think the other piece around really recognizing that oftentimes the big reaction, as you said, is about fear, and being able to look beyond how that reaction is impacting you and understanding what that means for the person experiencing it, and being able to make that shift. It's not easy, and that's what leads to compassion fatigue, as you brought up. It's really vital, and it's vital to know, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, around like sort of what do you do and how do you manage that. You've talked, Mitch, when we met previously and talked about this, you talked about the 3 people in your marriage, and what that means, and what is that, and how that looks for you. So I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit with us about what do you mean by that? The 3 people in my marriage.
Yeah, I mean, it's I feel like Sonia and I were lucky that we had one good year of marriage our first year, before the stresses of graduate school and then later kids and everything. And so I feel like I kind of knew her. And so in my mind, that was always Sonia. She was, optimistic, she was happy, she was whatever. And then life kind of happened. It got stressful. And there was like this illness kind of took over. And so it always seemed like there were three of us, and this bipolar, illness was kind of this third variable in the marriage that kind of had to be managed and taken care of as well. And so so it's easy to logically think about it that way, but in the heat of the moment, and when you're tired and they're not sleeping and you're not sleeping, and then you're expected to go to work, and it's really hard to remember that it's that third entity in your marriage that's creating the social chaos. And it's not her,
Right.
So the other thing that's difficult, I think everybody struggles with this judgment, is, sometimes we would have conflict if Sonia looked at everything unpleasant about her is the illness, and everything good about me is Sonia. when it's like, actually though, there's some things you have control over that maybe aren't your illness, or that you actually could do a little bit more. And I think we were stuck there for a long time where I was like, got it, you have an illness. But really, like, I think there are some things that, that whether it's the overspending, whether it's the, there are some things that maybe you can take, a bit more ownership of. And that's really where the DBT skills were just a lifesaver, because I think it really taught Sonja that, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to just be taken over by my illness and say, okay, I guess it's driving now and I'm just a passenger. Like it's like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, I get it. If you're at an 8, got it. It's a tornado. There's not a lot of driving that you can do right now because you're in a full-blown episode. But the skills are really about, if you're at a 3 or a 4, how do we get you back down to a 1 so you don't become an 8? And that was 5 or 6 years ago, that was a huge revelation to us. And the DBT skills and that was just incredible, because she's like, wait a minute, as I see myself going there, I can use some skills, I can take some ownership of it, so I don't have 8s. And then maybe I still have big emotions, and maybe I get to 5 sometime, but I can keep it a little bit more contained. And that was great.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great, because there's some sense of responsibility and accountability for how you manage your symptoms. I mean, she can't, just like any other medical illness, right? You can't completely control your diabetes, but there are things you can do to minimize the symptoms getting worse. And that's where accountability comes in. And, when we talked last year, and I remember when I was reading the book, and I told Sonja and Rachel, I'm like screaming while I'm reading the book, like, why isn't anybody talking to her about DBT? Come on. And finally, her friend Lori, did the research and got her involved. And then I read all of the threads of that in the second book. So much of DBT is brought into the second book, which I think was really phenomenal, because it says that your family has really embraced those concepts, radical acceptance, right? And then, all of the, that you can, what's Sonja's quote? Let's see, hold on a second, because when you said it to us, Rachel, I wanted to make sure I wrote it down. 2 truths can be true at the same time. Right? And even if they're opposing, right? You can love and really hate or be really mad at somebody at one time. You can be, a great person and also be doing really destructive things that hurt other people. And those things can exist together. And to me, that's one of the most sort of aha moments for people. And I think for the audience that we want the audience to hear is, if you're wondering about this dialectical behavioral therapy, it definitely is sort of typecast as the therapy for people that have a borderline personality disorder. And it is very much an evidence-based, evidence-informed practice for those folks. But for anybody who struggles with big emotions, with having trouble regulating their reactions, for having any kind of difficulty with seeing things and dealing with things in moderation, it's a hugely valuable and important clinical intervention. So look it up. Perhaps try to, be informed. If your therapist isn't recommending it for you, talk about it, because we see that it does help folks in many different ways. So I think that's a important message to say. All right, so what else do we want to ask? Let me see. Well, I think this is sort of goes along with what we were saying, and maybe Mitch, you can tell us, when did you realize that Sonja needed professional help? Rachel brought up at the beginning that you guys kind of hid this thing. You didn't really know what it was, but you didn't want to talk about it. You didn't want anybody to know about it. But when did you sort of say, all right, this is a thing and Sonja needs help?
Yeah. So there were little breadcrumbs that you kind of say, oh yeah, I saw little things, but I didn't I wasn't really willing to take it, kind of take it on. So I kind of I had this problem where I have one sister, 5 brothers, and a mom. And my sister and my mom are incredibly just even keel. I think I've seen them each cry once, in my life or whatever. I mean, they're just very, not big personalities. And Sonya's just a much bigger personality, and you see more of her emotions. And so what I started seeing is kind of behavior, after a few years of marriage where, just totally buried in bed all day and whatever. And so for years and years, we thought, okay, maybe she's just got depression. And so she was getting depression meds, hadn't seen much of the mania or some of these things, but never really got better. Would spend a lot of time in bed. And so I remember probably about 7 years after we were married, just then some really bizarre behaviors, like she got really into Tony Robbins, who I love. He's the motivational coach, and I think he has a lot of great things to say. And one night I was sleeping on the couch because we'd gotten into an argument, so that's where I sleep. And I hear rustling, and I see her with her bags packed, and I'm like, "Where are you going?" And she goes, I'm going to go see Tony Robbins. He can help me. He can," like, she knew something was broken, something was wrong. And at this point, Rachel was maybe 5 years old. And I just said, "Sonja, you're scaring me. Like, these are just strange, really strange decisions." But she didn't see them as strange. To like, "You're just going to what? Show up on his doorstep?" I mean, like, what's going to happen here?
Through, right.
Yeah, just not really thinking a lot of things through. And so it was a few more years after that, and we lived in Texas, that my sister-in-law, who has a bipolar sister, would say things to me like, "Sonja's bipolar." I mean, she could see like some of these things, and I'm like, bipolar. I mean, she's depressed a lot, but I don't know about bipolar. So we went to this marriage therapist because that was the point we were at, where, hey, it's not me, it's our marriage, and you're a bad husband or whatnot. And so we went to the marriage therapist, and within one meeting, he was just like, "This isn't going to work. I need to work with Sonja first." I mean, he saw it like right away.
Mhm.
And that, in some ways, not that I don't want things to be my fault. I'm sure there are things that I needed to fix as well from a marriage standpoint. But he was smart enough to realize, I've got to work here first before a marriage therapy thing is going to work. And that was really, he kind of he was able to hold her accountable to things I couldn't. So he would say, "Okay, you can't go over a week without showering, or I'm going to put you in the hospital," right? You can't do some of these things. You can't wear the same clothes, for 10 days, or we're going to put, so he would set little goals with her. And at that point, he still thought she was just depressed, didn't realize that she was, had behavioral health issues. And so it was kind of this progression where it was probably many years of just thinking it was depression. And then it kind of evolved to where, like, no, it's this other thing. And I know when people read the book, they were really frustrated, like, why are they not getting this? It's so obvious, she's got, whatever. But really, even misdiagnosis is pretty common. If you don't get to see all the symptoms at one snapshot, you just get to see them in bits and pieces. So,
What was it like getting the diagnosis of bipolar disorder? What was it like for you, and what was it like for Sonja?
So we, when she got hospitalized the first time, the therapist at the hospital pulled her and my mom in, or her and her mom in, and said, Sonja's bipolar. And I think I had been so beaten down and was so conflict averse because Sonja was so explosive. I would have been terrified to tell Sonja she was bipolar because of just the beat down that would have happened. And just, it would have meant weeks of terror. And I mean, it would have just been awful because her dad had been diagnosed as bipolar, and she didn't want to be anything like her dad. And And so the therapist said that, and I just knew it was going to be an ugly scene once they brought Sonia in and said the same thing. But it like had to happen. Like the Band-Aid had to get ripped off. And so they bring Sonia in. The woman tells Sonia that she's bipolar. And Sonia just, first thing she does is turns around and looks at me and is like, do you think I'm bipolar?
Oh, boy.
And I'm like, I just did not want to be there right then.
Yeah.
And I said, and again, I was probably like a little too sheepish. And I was just like, well, Sonia, you know, I'm not a professional. And like, if they're telling you you are, you really probably like need to listen to them. So I was trying to like crawfish out of it a little bit
Yep.
and back into it. And then, you know, she exploded, took the person's head off, told them how dare they, you know, and you've read the book and how that went down.
Yep.
And then they just had to take her and get her out of the room. But it had to happen. I mean, she had to go rock bottom, and she had to realize she has got to accept this or she's just not going home.
Right.
You know, for a long time. And I think that's what made her realize that, okay, all these people, I mean, maybe it's me, you know, maybe it's, and maybe she always kind of knew, but it was just because of stigmas, because of all these things, and because of what it meant for her life. But like, yeah, she had in her mind that my life is supposed to be these things. And accepting this diagnosis means my life is not gonna, I'm not gonna have any of those things. You know, it's, my life's gonna be terrible based on what I've seen my family have with bipolar. So yeah, it was traumatic.
Yep. What role did Sonia's suicide attempt play in the sort of, you know, the beginning of the maybe recovery, you know, and healing and acceptance process, or rock bottom? I mean, you talk about in the book, there's rock bottom that the person experiences and there's rock bottom that the caregiver experiences. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think the suicide attempt, you know, there were many times we hit rock bottom, but a lot of times it wasn't at the same time. And the suicide attempt, we hit it at the same time.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of times when you're going through difficulties in a marriage, you'll have your reasons for keeping it together. And it's like, okay, well, we'll keep it together because we love each other. And then when there's just tons of fighting, well, okay, we're keeping it together now because of the kids, right? And then we're keeping it, you know, there's like all these reasons you're keeping it together. And when the suicide attempt happened, what preceded that was tons of overspending, you know, $150,000 on credit cards, buying jewelry and all this stuff with no intent of taking it back, making it right. You know, it's just kind of like, hey, Mitch, you just fix it, you know? And so like in my head, it was, okay, she's going to ruin us financially. In my job, she exhibited some very risky behaviors where, like, she called my boss's boss's boss, the university president, and basically told her thoughts on like my job and what he should be doing and whatnot, to where it's like, okay, that's the kind of thing that could get somebody fired. And then with the suicide attempt, it was this clash between her and my son. They get in this big argument. She takes a bunch of pills, and now my son has to go live, you know, with my brother 1,000 miles away. So I felt like, okay, now the family's not even together. And so it felt a bit like she was just dangerous. She was going to break up the family, destroy our finance. Like everything was going wrong. And then at the same time, she was just leaning on me for all emotional support. I was, you know, bathing her. I was, you know, and I just got to this point after the suicide attempt where it's like, you have got to stand on your feet somewhat. I cannot hold all this together. And I just said, you know, I'm going to move out. You've got to get a job. You've got to show that you can function at some level on your own. And that was the time that her friend found DBT. And Sonia was when she was in the hospital, she was surprisingly just open to that. Okay, she needed to do something different. She couldn't just keep leaning on everyone else, all of her support systems to get her through the illness. She had to take a new approach to the illness. And that's where after a few months, it was like, wait, maybe we can make this work because she's getting this help and she's seeing things differently, and she's open to hearing, that she's got some more work to do. So yeah.
And, I remember, in reading the book that perhaps, I mean, we don't know, we can't ever define somebody's rock bottom, but certainly the fear of the loss of the marriage, because there was separation talk, right? You were looking at apartments, and you sort of, you gave her somewhat of an ultimatum, not, that her illness is going to be cured, but that she's going to take some ownership and some accountability to the damage she's doing, and and take some responsibility for how she can start to begin to take at least part responsibility in taking care of herself.
Yeah.
And that seemed to resonate, right? So to me, that's the thread of the, when you love somebody, you love your husband and your kids, and that's what seemed to be what helped her be able to start making some of the changes. Certainly, again, it's not a cure, but start taking some ownership, and so that your partners are in your family in fighting this, rather than you were sort of left holding all of that, because that's a lot. And I think I want you to maybe, if you can, give some advice to other family members who are caring for loved ones with a mental illness, and talk a little bit about what you do to take care of yourself and to fill your bucket and to replenish yourself in this whole process.
Yeah, because that's sometimes you have this this guilt that either you shouldn't have, or that maybe the person you're with, it puts on you. So it's kind of like, hey, I think I need to go run or exercise or whatever. Well, they're in bed and they can't, they don't feel like they can. And so then it's kind of like, oh yeah, you go do your thing, go take care of you, and I'm here suffering, right? So you get into this thing of, you're always the bad person because you're able to do things they're not able to do. Even showering, like, oh fine, go shower. I don't even have the energy to do that. So it's tricky. How do you take care of yourself when sometimes you're made to feel like that's a selfish thing to do? That was a problem with us for a lot of years. Sonja finally got to a point where she realized, hey, I can give you more if you let me fill up. I mean, because a lot of the energy that you're getting is because I'm giving it, and I need to get it from somewhere as well. Right. So I think we got to a good place on that. But one of the things that really was a game changer for me is when I was in my doctoral studies, I just stumbled on this article about organizational theory, and they were talking about mindfulness and organizations. And I saw these words that said, like, it helps people with ruminatic thinking, with, obsessive compulsive, all these different things. And I said, that's Sonja, that's Sonja. Yeah. And so I, bought her all these CDs, John Kabat-Zinn and all this. And I'm like, Sonja, this is amazing. You got to listen to this. It just didn't register. Not at all. She wasn't at a point where she was ready to hear that. And it sounded too like abstract and weird, but I took it. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm drowning and I'm gonna understand this better. And so I read all the books people read, right? Power of Now and Awareness by Anthony DeMello, and all these great books. And I had my own little like awakening that, wait a minute, a lot of my suffering is what I create and how I think about things. And that I could expand my ability to have more compassion and empathy for this person who's suffering, while they're making life really, really hard, they're going through something hard too. And so I feel like that made a big difference. And then I felt like just getting on a exercise routine, I got really involved in, this will sound kind of new agey, and I'm not a new agey person, but I had a physician recommend that I do hot yoga. And I did this, and you just sweat like crazy. But boy, after you come out of the shower, you feel good. You feel like you've gotten everything just out of you. And just those little things were really good for me. And I eventually got Sonja coming to hot yoga, and she's like, oh my gosh, this is really good. Like, I need to work my body more. I need to do some of these things.
Right.
And then eventually she got to mindfulness through DBT,
Mhm.
because DBT is very mindfulness based. And then she's like, oh, I get it now. I get all that stuff that you were saying. So those, to me, those were important
Good.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure the audience, that's important for them to hear, that those things, I could say they work, but hearing from somebody who they've actually worked for is extra powerful. And there's Rebecca. Oh, she's the party pooper, right? When we're in the middle of having a good conversation, here she comes. No, I know, we do have to wrap up, right? In a second.
Not yet.
Okay.
I've got a few questions that have come in that I want to.
I know.
I'll go
All right, so
off.
we'll have some time for those few questions. I
Yeah.
do want to give another shout out to Rachel and how she phrases things that she and her family have experienced. And I think it goes to the caregiver role, as we're talking about, and the way Rachel described it in the book is that the sick are frontline soldiers in a brutal, unforgiving war. And the healthy, the caregivers, are the medics and the bodyguards, putting themselves in harm's way to protect and heal the injured. When I read that, I was like, whoa, that just, to me, completely describes that situation. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there, because sometimes certain words, they just resonate with what's going on. And that's really important. And we really care about and want to make sure caregivers that are listening today are hearing this and are feeling validated in the struggles and the challenges, and what Mitch talks about, like, a caregiver wanting to do something for themselves and feeling or being made to feel guilty about that, and going through all of those different challenges, and that process is important. So we're hoping that resonated. And before, I just want to say ask a few questions. How is Sonja doing now?
Yes, Sonja's doing great. She's been very involved in mental health advocacy. I'd say it's a full-time job. She's up at 6 a.m. and she's working on it till 6 p.m. She and I have started mental health book clubs at women's prisons, and so we started with one. It was kind of fun in South Dakota at a women's prison, because they saw her on the news in South Dakota, and they called up the news and said, can she come to the prison? And they're like, well, she's in Iowa right now, but we'll pass on the message. And so we said, yeah, sure, we'll drive there and do a book club. And it was the most amazing thing. It was so incredible meeting these 40 women, and we donated copies of the book. And so then we contacted the women's largest prison in the world is in Chowchilla, California, 2,500 inmates. And we did 4 book clubs for them last month, and on person, and we donated the books. They all had read it. And now we'll be going every month, doing mental health book clubs with about 400 of the women at the prison. And their stories are amazing. It's like a magical hour. And so Sonja's just consumed with mental health advocacy, and she loves it, and loves sharing with people that you can have a life worth living. This does not have to ruin your life.
Right. That's just like goosebumps. It's amazing. Thank you for you guys doing that. And then we know Alex, your son, is married and works in finance. Lincoln is in college.
Yeah.
And Rachel's having a baby.
I am next week.
Next week, a week from today, you're going to have a baby. So that's the first grandchild, right? In the family. And that's so exciting. So we look forward, hopefully, Rachel, with you sharing with us after the birth of your baby, because after all, Rebecca and I feel like we're part of the family. So we've just decided we're part of the family, right, Rebecca? We sort of feel that way. And then you have another project coming up, right? The book, An Impossible Childhood. So that's from the perspective of the kids. So that'll be out
Within the year.
Within the year. Okay. That's great. So I think then my part of this is over, right, Rebecca?
Well,
We're gonna look at some questions maybe? Okay.
Yeah, we've been getting some questions.
Okay.
And it's really, I'm really thrilled, and hopefully this has been valuable. I know it's been incredibly valuable for me to listen to in the background here. But there have been a number of, obviously, caregivers that have popped in and have sent questions. Some of caregivers of fellow adults, maybe spouses, some caregivers of obviously young adults, but on the adult side, and then some youth that have come in. And I think what I'm seeing, some of the trends that I'm seeing is, where does someone start? So if somebody suspects that someone has a mental illness or is having challenges at home, whether it's from Mitch's, your perspective, having gone through it, and then Patty, your perspective in terms of New Hampshire and where we live, if it's people asking that live locally, you know, how does someone even begin?
Yeah, I think this is a tough one because it really depends on, it's a very different question if you have somebody who says, hey, I've got a problem I'm dealing with and I need to know where to start. Because that's kind of like, okay, well, you know, get an appointment with somebody or take some online assessments. You know, there's a place that you can go. The hardest is if somebody is in complete denial that they have anything wrong, and everyone around them knows that something is wrong. Because like in our case, it almost had to become you hit rock bottom before you admit it. And it's really hard because if you kind of say, if you're some amateur, you know, it says, I think you're borderline personality, you know, who are we to like make the diagnosis? And so I think, you know, I think a good approach is, if you think somebody's struggling, not make it so much about, hey, I'm going to diagnose you, and just, are you okay? You know, it seems to me that you know, you've been struggling a lot with, you know, anger, or are you getting sleep, or, you know, kind of maybe try to open their eyes that a lot of the way they're behaving isn't hidden. They may think it is. All of us are our own blind spot. We don't see how we come off, but other people really see it. And so I think really just letting people know that you're concerned about them, more than, hey, I'm going to diagnose you, you know.
And I think, in addition, I mean, I could say, if you're not sure, you know, call up the mental health center in your region, and you know, certainly talk about it. If you're a caregiver, if you're not sure what might be going on for your loved one, and you might be able to get some advice about that, on how to figure out what's happening for your loved one, or if you need some support, some help for yourself, whether that's therapy or support groups or information, you could talk to folks at a mental health center, and they can help guide you. We have resources and folks that can point you in the direction, to make sure that you're getting what you need. And there's all kinds of different groups. There's grassroots support groups. There's all kinds of, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, you know, is a national organization that has all kinds of resources to help caregivers. So certainly you can look on their website, or if you call your local community mental health center, we can point you in the direction, and give you some resources and some ideas.
I think as well, Patty, and you read this in Sonya's book, if you think you're struggling and like, okay, maybe there's an issue, sometimes questioning what you think is normal is good. I know with Sonja, she thought it was normal to think about suicide every day, you know, and she had really gotten to where, of course, everybody wants to die. And it's like, no, that's really not normal. So if you find that wow, life just seems like a grind all the time, and I'm not having many up moments, just questioning that. That's
Yep.
probably not, that's probably not normal, and it's not everybody's feeling that same way. You probably need some help.
Yep. Good point. Thank you.
Yeah, to follow up, Patty, what you were saying, so when I opened, I had said that in the state of New Hampshire, there's 10 community mental health centers, and we are all part of an association. Then there's one website that people can go to view all the mental health centers, see where your mental health center is based upon where you live, and this website will bring you to your center if you're not sure. That website is nhcbha.org. And that's a central resource, or if you Google New Hampshire Community Behavioral Health Association, that'll bring you there also. And there's a wealth of resources there, and all of our pages, our websites have information and resources locally to you also. And as we're closing, I think we only have a few minutes left. So I wanted to ask, which are other questions that have come in, and kind of summarize it for Mitch and Rachel, and then sort of a different slant for Patty with all your years of experience and having worked with so many families, individuals, is if you had to say what is hopeful to somebody, what is an element of something you've seen in your journey, or Patty, you've seen with clients, what is the message of hope to leave with people about whether they're a caregiver or whether they're someone who is in recovery or who's questioning if they need to work through a mental health struggle or go for diagnosis for something? What is something to glean on that was hopeful for you to help guide them?
I think for me, it's that people can improve. And so it doesn't have to be a low point forever. Just because someone has a lifelong illness, it doesn't mean that what you're going through in that moment is lifelong. And so seeing just improvements, even that I've made as I've learned about DBT therapy on how to, better support my mom or have my own thoughts be improved. It's just seeing, even within the last 3 years, I'm like, oh my gosh, the relationship I have with my mom is so different, or our family culture has changed. And it's just a lot easier to have open dialogues with each other about the hard stuff. And I'm so lucky I have a mom who's willing to work on herself. So I know I can tell her, hey, this doesn't work. This really hurts my feelings when you do that. And she can say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I'll work on that. So I think for me, the biggest thing about, the journey that was hopeful is just that people can change, that people can improve, and no one stays the same forever if they don't want to.
Yeah, I would agree with what Rachel said. It's funny how this illness kind of made most hours of most days just really difficult, for years and years for us. And now it's like there's an illness there, but we just are living life. It's not like it's this thing that's like a cloud over us. It's like, oh, she's got a mental illness, but we're living life, and it's a good life, and we're happy. And so I think knowing that it won't always feel this way. I mean, if you're at that rock bottom and the lowest low, it feels like it's always going to feel that way. It won't always feel that way, especially if you get treatment and learn skills, and it can feel very different.
And I think certainly Rachel and Mitch said a lot of what I would say. I think what I would add for some people is that you're worthy of it. You're worthy of feeling better. Not everybody has the benefit of a loving husband and children and financial, and I'm not minimizing anything about these guys, but not everybody can relate to that. So when it comes right down to it, having to believe that you believe, you love yourself and believe yourself enough that you're worthy of feeling better and experiencing life in a less painful way, I think will open doors for people.
Yeah.
That's so great. That's so important. I mean, we all go through different struggles at different times. And that's a number one message that we try and leave with people, because we are all worth it, and everyone, no matter what.
Yes.
or where
That's
some
right.
of that everybody is
That's
working
right.
and can have the support behind them if they raise
Yep.
their hand and ask.
Yep.
Well, I want to respect the three of your time and our audience's time. I just thank you, Rachel and Mitch, so much for joining us again. And I really also ultimately want to thank Sonja, who
Of course.
was the one who wanted to share her story ultimately. And you're doing incredible work. You really are. It's so important. It makes such a difference in the work that centers like us and the kinds of staff that work here with our clients. It literally makes all the difference to hear first person stories and real life, that it shifts the conversation. And so we're really grateful for your time. So the book again is An Impossible Wife. And if you didn't read the first one, An Impossible Life is the first book. And I happen to follow you guys on Instagram, which I've been watching you guys go to the jails, and it's really fantastic. And that on Instagram is, the handle is Impossible Lives. And it's a really neat snapshot into kind of the actual advocacy work that you guys and the family is doing. So I just want to leave people with Seacoast Mental Health Center's website directly, which is smhc-nh.org. We are available 24/7. We are never not staffed. We are never not here for you. You're never alone. If you need us, you can call either of our two numbers that's on our website at any time of any day and reach somebody for support. Those two numbers are 603-431-6703 and 603-772-2710. So again, thank you. Hopefully we get to do this next year.
Yes.
The third book.
I hope so
And,
too.
Yeah. And we're really grateful for your time.
Well, thank you so
All right.
much.
Good luck. Good
Thanks.
luck, Rachel.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.